Ja, willkommen zurück aus der kurzen Pause.
Well, we're back from our short break. I like to call it fag break. You can take care of all sorts of things. And we'll continue with a presentation by Daniel Schmidt of SUSE Germany, who will speak about the sovereignty issues. Welcome to Germany, to people at their end devices. I'll speak about the experience of a live migration in times where we're often shocked with high figures, but I don't think we need to be afraid of figures, and that's why I take it a step further. You can see all the figures that I'll present in my presentation, and you can be interested to see where they will reoccur. My name is Daniel Schmidt. I've been with SUSE for 17 years. This year I'll get my personal ID when I grow of age, and I'm with the infrastructure team. I'm head of this team, and together with this team we make network and server services available for our development department who need this to make our products. A few words on SUSE company, a bit of consumer information. It's the biggest open source company in the world. Among our core products are the SUSE Enterprise server and software-defined computing. We took over Rensche company last year. We're still integrating them, and they will help us make cybernetics offers. We have 2,000 staff members globally, a bit more than 2,000 staff members. We have 5,000 partners who also participate in our product development, and we have more than 17,000 customers across the globe. SUSE is also the biggest sponsor of the openSUSE project, not least because the products that we make and sell are based on the openSUSE distribution. So it's an integral component for us, and therefore an important project. And along came the year of 2020, a very special year for SUSE. Not because there was a pandemic, nor because we all had to go to the home office, not even because we had to migrate our VPN servers to new hardware. All of that happened in parallel. That's just our day-to-day business. But 2020 was special because SUSE became independent of a parent group of whom we'd always use services and products. We have been taken out of this parent company and had to establish a lot of things, because this independence means both freedom, which feels good, but also responsibilities. We had to establish departments that we never had at SUSE. For instance, an accounting department. We needed new infrastructure that previously our parent used to offer. We had to install new services that we had used as a service from our parent company in the past. And the services, that's where my team was involved, because we worked on the technical independence of SUSE. And part of this was an increase of our IT stack. We had an IT stack in the past, but it was not completely in our hands. It was always part of a parent group. And the main job for us was the introduction of a new identity management system in the UCS came along at the right time. What do we need the ID management system for? We need it for our so-called community accounts. The community accounts are customers for internal users, i.e. our own staff members, but also external users, because we very closely cooperate with the community. So the internal accounts, about 1,800 of them, are for our product development, so the developers, the managers who are involved in product development. Add to this the external customers, i.e. our partners, about 5,000 of them, not all of whom are attached to the identity management system, but many of them have access to our system. And last but not least, our community, our SUSE community, because it maintains the basis of our distribution, and that is about 80,000 accounts that we need to administer there. But overall, we have 2.1 million accounts within our company that we need to deal with. That's quite a challenge. The community services that we run on behalf of the community is not only the image service, but a large number of services, starting with Bacilla, our back-checking system, the system that uses to send in error reports before, during, and after installation. Then the various services that we operate, so the image service, which is a service where everybody can generate an account, or create an account, and upload their source code, and we compile it for our applications, also for different, even for different hardware constellations. Then we have different services, the OBS, the Open Image Service. Anybody across the world can upload their images. Then the IBS, the Internal Image Service, that's where we make our enterprise products. And we have the PBS, the Partner Image Service, where partners can upload their own software, which might not be public. Our partners also have access to a Jiva instance. That's also part of the community services. And our largest community, the openSUSE community, has many, many services and websites that they operate, for which we make authentication available. We identified about 50 services that need to be adjusted and modified. Let's summarize the wider challenge. So we're supposed to support migration of 2.1 million of our customers from Access Novel Manager, a system that no longer exists. Luckily, we found some people who still know about it, are knowledgeable about it. And the target is the corporate management server. Luckily, we found a company in Bremen who know about this. The installations are to be distributed in our various data centers. So every data center should have a Univention slave, a pair of Univention slaves. The migration is to be performed in production with as little downtime as possible. For legal and data protection reasons, no transfer of password hashes is possible. The target system must be certifiable under common criteria, because we were common criteria certified in the fall of last year. For migration itself, we have 6 weeks for preparation and the migration itself, and migration will end with a hard deadline. It's cast in stone, because on the last day our connections to the parent company will be interrupted and network cables will be pulled. We unplugged. So there's no room for movement here. So that is the overall structure. We have a master server in Nuremberg. We also have a backup server, both in Nuremberg, another one in Prague, to have a backup in a different region. And then in every region we have a pair for the various data centers. And one of them is Prague, Nuremberg, Provo, and Beijing have a slave pair. And that leads to a highly available system. But that doesn't reduce the number of challenges. So we considered how to approach this project, and we figured we need to optimize something there. First of all, we thought we might optimize the number of users. What was important here was to avoid any takeover. What we mean by this is that a user who's not imported into the new system, but who had transferred data to any of our systems, be it a forum, a chat, a host, Bacilla, or the image server, that's a new user using the same username cannot access this data. So users who are inactive need to be blocked if they don't want to participate anymore. So what did we do? We took a look at all our services. We wrote tools to find which users have stored which data and which services. And the list generated this way was about 200,000 users. So that's how many people had uploaded data to our system of whatever type of data we're talking about here. So that's only a factor of 10, a tenth of the overall number of accounts. So that was a big success. And further optimization we reserved for future reference. And we also wrote our own tool to import our accounts piecemeal to the Univention universe, and it allowed us to adjust our tool at any stage. For migration itself, we wrote a migration proxy, a little server service which runs on a Univention client. The idea being that this proxy can log on to the old server, but also the new Univention server, thus allowing for migration, performing the migration, and I'll show you later on how this will work. We also decided that the LDAP scheme of the Novell server would be rebuilt in the Univention server. It's not an innovation as such because we inherit some legacy problems, but it meant a lot of time savings. And that is something we cannot, not to be scoffed at. So we didn't have to convert any data. And the systems that need to be certified for Univention need to be adjusted only minimally. We also decided to have a preliminary import of all data of all users and to switch them to inactive, which meant that all the data is already available. So the migration process was as follows. We made the migration proxy online. The first service that we chose was Bacilla to move to Univention. That meant that all Bacilla users had to register to log on to the migration server. We selected Bacilla among other things because it was the first server that wasn't allowed to communicate with the Novell server anymore. On the migration proxy, the password was verified on the old system were successful. The proxy spoke to the Univention server, activating the account, and rerouted the user to their password registration page. And after entering a new password, users had two accounts, basically one on the old server, which still has to be used for the non-migrated services, and a Univention server that has to be used for those services that had already migrated. And that's how we proceeded with all other services. Here you can see it with a pseudocode, shown as a pseudocode. We didn't transfer all services on a single day. We wouldn't have been able to manage that. Would have been too much work. But we did it service by service during a number of days, which gave us the benefit of being able to address the arising problems, the problems that arose in the migration process. So we were able to stretch out those problems. As we performed the migration of the services with a large number of users, sped up the whole system as well. Our hard deadline limited the time available for migration. So our users, our communities, only had a short period of time available to migrate. We were aware of the fact that some wouldn't manage to do that because they don't regularly access their account, don't log on necessarily regularly, and so we offered the possibility of submitting support tickets, and we got 50 to 100 support tickets for a few weeks. But we distributed that among our staff, and we were able to handle this. Now, what did we learn? The import of 2.1 million LDAP accounts takes a very, very long time. We were aware of that ahead of time, but we tested it on a test system. We wouldn't recommend it. We find it's very helpful to have your own tools for import and filtering of the source data. This is very helpful to address any issues arising on the customer side, on your system side. We imported and rewrote some of the data that we imported, but not to a large extent. But that's all things that you can do if you have your own tools that you've written yourself. What we thought was worth its weight in gold was the Univention support. During the weekend, we had a developer on our side who helped us throughout the weekend and was able to modify the code where needed. And last but not least, open source rocks. That may not be surprising for a company like SUSE. That's our core business. We know it, of course, but it proved itself again in this project that it's worthwhile going for open source, because there were small modifications, just a few individual lines of code that were needed during the weekend, migration weekend. We only needed those modifications for the period of migration, and we can only do that if you have it open source. I can only thank Univention and its entire team. Thank you very much for the time before, during, and after the migration, and I'm looking forward to more years of good cooperation. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I'm willing to answer your questions. We can also take them to the breakout room or whatever. Well, thank you very much from my side as well for this informative presentation. It's always good to have a mix of projects with small users and smaller projects, but also big projects where massive amounts of data are handled, like here. So there are no questions from the users so far. What I find fascinating is we're still 10 minutes ahead of time. We would still have time, we can maybe wait for a few questions to come in. What I find very pleasing is that it worked so well with support. I can only return the compliment. That's what my colleagues told me. The questions that you asked were very good. Then it's, of course, much easier to give support. Well, it's, of course, helpful if we work on the projects ourselves and allow the LDAP developers to ask the questions themselves. That's not necessarily the case with every customer. Yeah, very well qualified. Well, are there any other projects you have in the pipeline, or are there any open issues? Well, we certainly want to stick with it and migrate more data to Univention. We are still in the process of moving out of our dependency from our former parent company. There are still some services that we're using that they provide, but these are legacies that we need to overcome. And Univention is, of course, the perfect candidate because they offer the very systems, the very services that we need, but the team have to make that decision. Right now we have our own configuration management, and we have to check this. So we need to check this, but Univention is certainly a candidate here. Right. By now, there are some questions. There was a question, was there some feedback from the community on the migration? So 50 to 100 support tickets per week. Maybe there was some other feedback as well. The feedback really was related to problems with migration. For instance, the migration proxy crashed for a couple of hours on one occasion. And the problem was that the migration couldn't be concluded in good time, or couldn't be concluded. There were some people who operate openSUSE servers who had their qualms because we decided this over their heads. In the past, our parent company decided which system to use. Now it was SUSE who decided. If the openSUSE project would take on this thing, then it would have much more problems. It would result in even more problems. Well, we'll certainly stay in touch on the topic of openSUSE. Well, we cannot part with some of the control that we have because of the certification issues. Yes, then there's the question of how many backend servers you need for 200,000 users, and how do you manage this? We only have one master server, two backup servers, one in Nuremberg, one in Prague, because the backup server could be upgraded to a master server. If needed, we would like Prague to take over, and we have the services connected to the slaves. So we have two slaves at every data center. Is there any explicit load balancing before the LDAP, or does the system know all the servers and use the one that is available? Well, initially we offered the slaves directly for the migration period, for reasons of time. But now we have a proxy prior to each slave. Well, then there's an interesting question, a question that I find interesting. Is there any experience that you made that could go into UCS? Yes, there are some features that we've integrated into your product. That's changes to self-service, i.e. the way things are handled when there is some self-service registration, or that you can make deletions of accounts as a self-service. That's something that wasn't possible in the past, I believe. and the feature that you activate a user account upon password registration. So the users can create their own passwords when upon migration. That is something that wasn't possible in the past. Any wishes for the future? Well, now that we have covered all our problems, I can't really think of anything. But that doesn't mean that we won't develop that in the future. Yes, if you do come up with any wishes, let us know about it. Then, last question for this channel, the question concerning migration tools. Were drift tools used, or were only custom tools applied? It was only custom tooling, really. 20 to 100 lines of code in Python, which sifted through 8 gigabytes of data dump. If you're interested, I can ask my colleagues whether they are willing to share the code. If you're interested, please let me know. Well, I think that is something that could be handled in the breakout stage now. We're still 2 to 3 minutes before our time, and I suggest that we go to the breakout stage now. We don't have any other questions here, and we'll have another 4-minute break now and continue at 2 p.m. with the presentation on OnlyOffice.